dobrodošli u kulturni centar Spaskovska. Učinjenje vas pozdravljam i također želim da vas pozdravim i instituta za filozofiju i društvenu teoriju sa kojom budu sarađujemo i nadam se i buduće i da mi se zapravo u ime Beogradske kulturne javnosti zahvalim na ovako impozantnom i važnom programu kakav je ovaj koji je započet danas pod nazivom razmišljanja o kapitalizmu i zahvaljujući kojem imamo priliku da čujemo važne imena i važne razmišljanja na ovu temu od stručnjaka iz sveta, a naravno i od stručnjaka iz naših redova. Kulturni centar Beograda je izuzetno velika čast da upravo ovaj okrugli sto, na neki način danas je program započeo u institutu, a ovdje se nastavlja, dakle, tema politike i istorije u istočnoj Evropi i, dakle, za ovu priliku 6 stručnjakinja iz nekoliko zemalja. Njih će predstaviti i program će moderirati Adriana Zaharijević, deo tima koji je osmislio i realizovao ceo ovaj program. Još jednom hvala. Ukoliko vam nešto treba, slobodno mi se obratite. Imamo ovdje problem sa klimom, tako da slobodno se analizirate da li točno je moguće da ne bismo imali to napraviti kao nepotrebni problem. Hvala vam i izvolite.
Hvala ti, Vera, i odmah zahvala Kulturnom centru Beograda, zato što nas je danas ugostio ovde, ne prvi put, i svakako nadam se ne i poslednji. I will continue in English, ali pre nego što nastavim na engleskom. Dakle, pozvala bih sve da kasnije se priđu našem stolu ovde i uzmu ove naše proliske na kojima je program, na kojim koji zapravo predstavlja ovaj događaj narednih 6 dana. This is the first day of our Reflections on Capitalism week. I will be very brief because we had the first part, so to speak, of this politics of history today at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. I will only very briefly introduce our presenters today, dear friends, dear colleagues. But before that, I would like to get all of you to think of the space that we're today in, the space that we all know, as Olivera said, Belgrade public, who comes at this place very often. I'm referring to this exhibition and the fact that those are very young people who are obviously dead, and these are those people's dreams on the other hand. So we should think of how history and the lack of memories or the different sets of memories influenced the death of very young persons in this country, but I would say not only in this country, and the lack of versatility of their dreams as well. I will also refer you to this antiquity fair outside of the Belgrade Cultural Center, which really resembles more of what we'll talk about today, which resembles some kind of mishmash of artifacts strangely gathered together, where you have both Tito's and Lenin's heads in iron, and also have China, and also have personal memories of the very different eras gathered together at the same place. So how do we read this very jumbled history, for example, at some sort of antiquity fair as we have it right in front of this place, and how we connect it with the imaginings of future, which can be seen probably in this art exhibition? Where are the gaps and how to connect or disconnect those two? I will now turn to my friends, I would say, more than anything else today, and only very briefly introduce them. we made some kind of schedule how to start. So I will mention first Tanja Petrović, who's coming from Ljubljana, from Slovenian Academy of Arts and of Science and Arts. After her, we'll have Ljubica Spaskovska, who is coming from University of Exeter, UK, but is originally from Skopje. Then we will have Danijela Majstorović, who's coming from University of Banja Luka. Then Chiara Bonfiglioli, who's presently doing her postdoctoral fellowship at University of Pula. And in the end, Professor Ghodsee, who's coming from Bowdoin College in US.
I think it was in spring 2012. I was in Maribor, in Slovenia, where I currently live, and I was attending a guided tour for the exhibition, which is called Unfinished Modernizations. Let me see, what was the... Yeah. Unfinished Modernizations Between Utopia and Pragmatism, Architecture and Urban Planning in the Former Yugoslavia and the Successor States. The exhibition was done by a group of young architects and some other people, cultural researchers and historians from all over the region, and was one of really nice collaborative projects with, of course, a traveling exhibition which was in Maribor, Ljubljana, Belgrade, everywhere else. So you could see it here at the Museum of History of Yugoslavia at some point. This guided tour I was at was actually organized and led by a young architect from Zagreb, one of main authors of the exhibition. The audience was a small group of people, some of us from Slovenia and some young people, I think, from the Great Britain, so it was in English, with a lot of kind of ironic, humorous interventions about socialist past. The guy was talking about Tito smoking Cuban cigars, about his yacht Galeb and traveling around the world, having this bon vivant, bourgeois life, in a joking, slightly distant way. And this need to have a distance was very prominent there. Also in the very setup of the exhibition, it was very clear the authors wanted to distance themselves and assess critically the legacy of Yugoslav modernist architecture. And it was also stated clearly on one of the plates. We were going around, and in this small public there was a guy with crutches who couldn't follow us all around because he couldn't climb the stairs. He was patiently waiting for us to come down again for the last part of the exhibition, and actually we came to for the last part where, among other things, there was a model of split tree of this very modernist, one of biggest socialist neighborhoods built in the 70s, basically. The guy on crutches was the author of Split Tree. It was Vladimir Mušić, the architect living in Ljubljana, who happens to be also the architect of the neighborhood where I live. He unfortunately died last year. And when we approached the model of Split Tree, the guide gave him a floor briefly, and what Vladimir Mušić said was more or less, you can joke about this past, you can make jokes, you can be ironic about it, but what I really want to say to you is that what we did at that time, we did that with firmly believing we are doing something which is very good for the people, and we did that with the whole heart. And what I'm interested in, and what I'm, in a way, consider a very important question is this clash, this discrepancy between neutralized, very often museum as today, pacified narrative about socialist Yugoslavia and pretty much affective, engaged memories, narratives and histories generations of people who still live in this area still possess. And this is the point where I think we need to open more productive space in rethinking the ways we think about Yugoslav history or history of socialism generally, especially when we try to relate it to the visions and imaginations of the future. This problem is, of course, not limited to former Yugoslavia. It is a post-socialist issue in a way, and there is a symptomatic, I would say, outburst of memory studies in post-socialist Europe. Everyone, we have memory studies. I myself work at the institute, which is called Institute for Culture and Memory Studies. And it's, of course, very nice, and there is this need also articulated by historians to think more on social history and not so much on political history. But there is, again, this very symptomatic and large gap between history and memory. And in a way, we speak about memories of people who lived in socialism as memories who are by definition pretty much affected by the present state of affairs, their present position, their present economic situation, their success in getting by in post-socialism and so on. And we always say that memory is not only highly influenced by the present, but also very contested, selective, controversial, something you cannot totally trust. And this is an epistemological moment which I find very important and something we need to consider when we also try to go back to socialism as an ideology to look for potential alternatives for the future. For this reason, the way we think about Yugoslavia, we write about it, we produce historical, museological narratives is very politically relevant. And of course, there is a lot of going on, and museums are places where we can find very different narratives of Yugoslavia. But in a way, there is this pretext that we can speak of Yugoslavia because it is a finished fact. It is something which has beginning and the end. And something which I suppose became meanwhile a permanent exhibition at the Museum of History of Yugoslavia is exactly called Yugoslavia from the beginning to the end. And of course, there is this huge problem which is at the same time a site for a lot of productive thinking, the fact that we are trying to conceive and think of history of certain period while still this period is part of personal existential memory of so many generations. And this is more or less an impossible job. But this impossibility also should be a site for productive thinking. So it should not be closed. We should not have this kind of very distant, authoritative historical narrative which aims to produce truth, or at least some version of truth in museums, for instance. Museums need to be places to open discussion, to produce also conflicted narratives, to produce dialogue. I mean, by no means I'm going to assess anything that being done here, but what I can say is that it's really so much going on here in very different spheres, and taken as a whole in something which is politically correctly called the region at the moment. Taken as a whole, it's a very exciting place and a great place to be. On the other hand, thinking about the future, I'm coming from Slovenia, where going back to anti-fascism and socialism is something extremely politically relevant at the moment. We have a political party who made it to the parliament a year ago, basically, to the surprise of everyone. And this party is called, actually it's a conglomerate of a couple of small parties. It's called Initiative for Democratic Socialism. And these guys and many other guys, including many of my friends, theoreticians, historians, activists, members of choirs, singing partisan songs and so on, they all in some way go back to socialist tradition, but in a way which deserves a bit of considering, because it's very important to practically all these people to stress that what they do has nothing to do with these more or less uncritical, emotional, affective, nostalgic approaches to the socialist past. So thinking of socialism as an alternative today, in this part of the world we very often do it excluding totally real experience of people who lived in socialism. There is a partisan choir in Slovenia called Kombinat. Actually, it's not a partisan choir, it's a choir, feminist choir singing partisan songs. These are more or less young women. Many of them have basically no, of course, they were not in partisans, but many of them did not live in socialism or have only partial, small childhood memories of it. But they have this very clear politics that they would sing only these songs who were made and who used to be sung in time of the Second World War. Anything that happened after 45 is illegitimate because it's tainted by ideology. And that would be typical approach, I would say. We are going back to socialism by excluding communists, excluding people who lived in socialism, and even politically, more problematically, we are going back to anti-fascism, excluding partisans and anti-fascists. There's a situation in which it becomes possible in Serbia to claim publicly that Draža Mihajlović was anti-fascist, and that's one of the narratives which surrounded his rehabilitation on legal basis. So in that sense, speaking about politics of history in this part of the world, maybe I want to conclude saying more or less three things. One is that we need to think about more inclusive concept of history. This clear division and so strong division between history and memory invites us to think about it because there are other parts of the world where this division plays practically no role. So there is something ideological there. The other thing I want to say concerns this kind of leftist initiative trying to reach for purified, essential, pure anti-fascism or socialist ideas, totally excluding all generations who actually lived certain experience. This makes people who have this experience unable to legitimately refer to that experience in their everyday struggles with the reality in which they live today. It's not possible to point your finger to the fact that there was a time where then some people actually had much more social security, where certain welfare state policies were very much present because it was socialism. And it was something which you cannot refer to. And at the end, revisionism here is, of course, a very important topic. And just as an invitation for people who try to fight revisionism, demanding or going back to socialist tradition and socialist ideology in a way, or communist, if you wish, or leftist, broadly speaking, we need to think to which extent we do not do revisionist practices ourselves by excluding people and their experience from our imagination of the leftist policies in the region. So I will start.
Here, I'll pick up on Tanja's point on historical revisionism, since Adriana mentioned that I come originally from Skopje, from Macedonia. I think in the past 5 years we have witnessed the most shocking and paradigmatic example of historical revisionism in Skopje, with the government planned complete makeover of the city, and especially the erasure of the socialist architectural legacy above all, by turning the city center into a grotesque neo-baroque, or what they call neoclassicist Disneyland. So this has started, as I said, when this right-wing conservative government took over, and not only the plan included building of entirely new set of buildings and administrative institutions, etc., but also the implanting of new facades, neo-baroque, neoclassical facades, on existing socialist buildings. So, for example, the current government building, which won, among other things, in the 70s when it was built, the Borba Award for architecture, and it was built by a very prominent Macedonian architect who was schooled in the Netherlands and in the US.
who is still alive and wasn't consulted and didn't give his approval for the makeover of his building. So now it's just a white, not even marble, neo-Baroque or neo-classicist building. So what is striking for me is that this whole architectural erasure of the socialist past in Skopje stands in stark contrast with that international legacy, actually, because as you know, or might not know, so after the earthquake in 1963, when the city was completely destroyed, there was a huge UN-led international development relief effort, and a group of international experts, among whom Tanja is the most well-known, although it was not only him. So the UN sponsored a completely new urbanist plan for Skopje, and even prominent urbanists like Adolf Ciborowski, who rebuilt Warsaw, British experts who worked on London after the Second World War, they were involved. So Skopje really became unique for its brutalist and modernist architecture. And a very famous trope became that Skopje is the city of solidarity. So this government and this new narrative actually completely suppressed this past, the fact that Skopje was really rebuilt also with the efforts of the Yugoslav community at the time, with huge funds from the UN and the international community. And now I'll quote just that you get a sense of just the sheer illogical reasoning of this new architectural and political elite. So, for example, one of these architects who endorsed this neo-Baroque makeover of Skopje, I quote, said, "The city's Baroque architecture was smashed, damaged, and burned at the end of the 17th century. Skopje was the first Baroque city in the Ottoman Empire, and we are trying to revive that era." So, people from the scholarly community, the architects, it's just, and people like us who deal with cultural issue and with history, simply find it hard to argue with these theories. How do you argue with this? What do you say, you know? So it's really become both, in a way, impossible to really structure any scholarly debate around these issues. The only comparable example that I can think of is the capital city of Kazakhstan, Astana, which, but on the other hand, Skopje, I think it's again even more shocking, because Astana was completely, it's a new capital city, the capital was moved right from Alma-Ata, and they have this new modernist, whatever, spree of construction and building, all in a very authoritarian, again, manner. Yes, exactly. So, again, I've seen their rebuilding of facades, which are elements from Kazakh ethnic heritage, whatever. But still, so in Skopje, as I said, this whole building spree was also accompanied with a very, what Jan Kubik says, hegemonic memory regime. So Macedonia is the only republic from the former Yugoslav republics, which not only implemented a very problematic lustration process with a very problematic lustration law, but it also opened a few years ago a museum of the Macedonian revolutionary struggle and a museum of the victims of communism. So this is the full title, it's a long title of a museum. And not only the museum doesn't have any concrete artifacts, it has wax figures like in Madame Tussauds, it has huge paintings, etc. But the part on the victims of communism, which of course it's only reduced to Goli Otok, not surprisingly, and the number of Macedonians who perished there, in the catalog and on the website, it says that these Macedonian secret organizations, without naming which ones, were fighting for the ever-increasing centralization of the Yugoslav Federation. So first of all, there is a blatant falsification of facts, because if these people, I mean, Yugoslavia is the example of a decentralized federation, especially from the 1960s onwards. But for the ignorant public or for people who just are not familiar with Yugoslav history, this is the type of narrative that the museum presents to them, that there were Macedonian dissidents, which also were very few, that were fighting against the centralization of the Yugoslav Federation. So I want to really stress falsification of facts, as Tanja said, and the failure to really engage with some of the facts of Yugoslav history. Not to mention that in Macedonia, none of the scholarly works on Yugoslavia have been translated into Macedonian. So really the public is only exposed to these media narratives where everything is reduced either to Tito's Cuban cigars or to his travels to the non-aligned countries or to the narrative of Goli Otok. So really the entire Yugoslav experience is reduced to several tropes which revolve around essentially the totalitarian paradigm without any critical distance or reflection. What I find even more worrying is not that this narrative is endorsed by a right-wing government, but that also slowly became appropriated by, let's say, the liberal civil society sector. And here I think we have to recognize that what we can call the Europeanization of memory, actually a lot is coming from the European Union resolutions and the introduction of 23rd of August as the day of remembrance of the victims of Nazism and Stalinism. Then this so-called platform for European memory and conscience, where, by the way, the Slovenian wife of the Milan Zver is involved, and especially Hungarian, Polish, Czech, and some Slovenian experts or members of the political elite are pushing this agenda. So in the Balkan countries, and especially Macedonia, it's really this nesting anti-communism is really being channeled through these European Union initiatives, and as if it became an imperative to show our Europeanness in a way. We are very willing to endorse that discourse, which is not only equalizing communism and Nazism, or Stalinism and Nazism, but also failing to reflect on the specificity of our own Yugoslav experience. I mentioned the illustration law. The illustration law, which the right-wing government implemented, is really targeting oppositional leaders, oppositional voices, especially former social democrat intellectuals or politicians. And to be fair to some European Union bodies, when the Macedonian Constitutional Court asked the Venice Commission to give an opinion on this illustration law, the Venice Commission said, I quote, that political, ideological and party reasons should not be used as grounds for illustration measures, as stigmatization and discrimination of political opponents don't represent acceptable means of political struggle. And what is even more absurd is that the temporal scope of the illustration law in Macedonia does not end in 1991, but in 2006, when the current party in power came in power, basically. So I think it's completely, it cannot be compared even to anything that happened in Central and Eastern Europe. It's a sui generis case. I mean, as Tanja mentioned, there are many scholars and theoreticians who have tried to reflect on how to write the history of memory, or how to problematize the link between the two. So, rightly so, Joseph Bayer, another German scholar, has argued that the analysis of the past in today's public discourse, so in Central and Eastern Europe, and this applies to the Balkans, is basically limited to listing the crimes of communism or moral hysteria in connection with the communist secret police agents. So another trope of this anti-communist discourse is, of course, the role of the secret services or UDBA. And again, I think this is another highly simplified and simplistic trope, which through which current political elites especially in Croatia recently with the whole debate about whether Karamarko was part of the Yugoslav Secret Service, etc. So is used to reflect on the Yugoslav past. So just to conclude for now, and then we can perhaps answer a question and open the debate, I think the imperative in both social sciences and in public discourse, also for agents of public history in museums and in the media, is really to explore the disappropriation or instrumentalization of particular images of the past and the construction of historical myths, or also for us to explore the ways in which people are in a way pushed or directed to remember and to identify with certain values, or even to adopt certain attitudes towards a constructed heritage. So really I think it's our task to deconstruct these myths. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you, everyone. So many interesting things. I come from cultural studies background, and I research material culture and talk about what's memory and what's history. It's always selective. Tradition is always selective, and we know that everything or something always gets excluded while something gets included. And then we could ask a question about doing diachronic research, no matter if we're media scholars, if we're sociologists, if we're whatever, memory scholars, anthropologists. And this is a question that was raised, that Ljubica raises just now, and that was also raised by, in this article that we kind of were asked to read, and it's an Annette Funk's article on state socialism. I had to talk about to open this, just to let you know what it's about. And basically, who comes under criticism in Annette Funk's article is basically the notion of agency and feminism in state socialism, and she critiques the work of Ghodsee, and she critiques Chiara Bonfiglioli, who sits here, who both sit here. And she does so in a very interesting way, and I'll try to connect that criticism with its major arguments. I mean, I'll try not to go for too long because we have both Chiara and Kristen here, with my current research on media representations of women in the 60s in Yugoslavia, and then with some Facebook debate that I think is also interesting for this. So it's basically, I'm a scavenger. I like to kind of dig dirt and, look at things from different perspectives, some of which may not be traditionally scientific. So first I'll start with this Facebook discussion that was triggered by my question: what brought more emancipation to women in Yugoslavia? Was it feminism or socialism? And there was this huge debate. Some 80 comments were just, people were just crazy. For 2 hours, I was receiving all sorts of answers, from like young Serbian lefties saying, no, we never needed feminism. Feminism was so bourgeois. We never needed it. Socialist Yugoslavia took care of everything. It was the politics of equality, etc., etc., etc. To some second-wave feminists from the former Yugoslavia, including Vesna Kesić, Sandra Slapčak, who were saying, but for example, domestic violence was a taboo in socialist Yugoslavia. Of course, we needed feminism because, yes, declaratively some things were recognized, but in practice, we were still in this patriarchal society that former Yugoslavia was, and of course we needed feminism of the 70s, etc., etc. Again, AFG was raised, and that's how it basically, that was this huge debate going on. And what Funk critiques in this article in particular, what comes under her criticism is her questioning of the so-called proactive agency. So she takes agency, the so-called proactive agency of women under socialism that, in her opinion, weren't really proactive. And then she concludes, and I think I'll leave this to Kristen because she wrote about it, and so no such agency was actually possible under communism. So this is a very different sort of side of the same coin. These guys are saying, we didn't need feminism because we had everything socialism, and then you have Western scholars critiquing feminist practices or feminist values in the former socialist countries as being essentially incapable of being feminist.
you know, which is a very, very interesting knot for me to kind of read through. And they also, and I have to quote something here, where Nanette Funk actually says something like this. I think this is completely unacceptable for me as a critical discourse analyst. She says, and I quote, "They can also build on what was positive in state socialism without labeling it feminist." So we can't, you know, this kind of sounds like feminist police to me, you know, it's like who gets to label something feminist? And what do we research here? So the problem with diachronic research, again, we have some philosophers here, and again, the question of epistemology always comes in. You know, what constitutes this episteme? What is feminist? Who is a revisionist? Why are they called revisionists? Okay, so we have these Macedonian revisionists who are trying to restore a Baroque Skopje, but then Western feminists are accusing Eastern feminists, or you know, feminists who are somehow saying that who are researching socialist feminism as being actually wrong. So yeah, I mean, we all know that socialism was complex. So you know, socialism in Yugoslavia, and I'm no expert to talk about socialism in Bulgaria or Hungary. But the question that I'd like to raise here, and this concerns memory politics, this concerns epistemology, feminist research, if we sort of, you know, want to look at it that way. What is it that we research? Are we all about labels? Are we researching practices? Are we researching something that Kristen calls multiple feminisms? And this is something where I really agree with you. And how do we trace feminist values? You know, is it the problem with labels? Is it a problem with time period? Are we being anachronistic calling AFG feminist because feminism only entered Yugoslavia in the 70s, you know, Drugca žena, 1978, or second wave feminism, the officially accepted feminism. Also, if, again, and I quote Ghodsee here, if the goal of feminism is to improve social lives, you know, if it's about a wider social justice, why not call it feminism? And I've also come under attack for this paper, this research, where I compare, I try to compare the post, to look for productiveness between post and post-socialism and post and post-feminism. And you know, if you look at this magazine that was published in Titograd in 1967-68 called Naša žena, that I only came across through a friend whose deceased mother was a Communist Party member, in fact, who had these magazines. I really would like to interview those men and women who worked for that magazine at the time. If you can help me, perhaps after this discussion would be very useful. The first page opens with, when is the end of a long workday? The second page goes like, only 5 women were elected to Cetinje assembly, you know, and you keep on, and then of course there is this small ad for 8x4 deodorant, or for Sloboda Čačak, you know, washing machines. Of course, there's, you know, there are all these traces, and I'm not trying to fetishize or idealize socialism, but even, you know, you don't have to be a critical discourse analyst to see that there was something emancipatory in those magazines that that strikingly stands out when you compare it to any of Gloria Grazia, you know, today. You know, so there was something there. I don't know what it was. I don't know if somebody will critique me for calling it feminist, but if that's not feminist, I don't know what is. So I think why, you know, again, going back to the same question, why research this? Why engaging in this sort of research? Well, we have to be aware of the control of our social imaginary, and that was done back then, and it's still being done today. But also we have to be aware of policing of the feminist and who gets to speak about it, you know, and from what position. Are we going to discuss women-friendly politics and shun this term, or are we going to look at the multiple ways in which feminist values and policies were actually exercised in the public sphere? Maybe the parliament, again, the representation of women in the 70s was what, like under 60%. And then another crucial issue here, and this is something that other feminists from the region pointed out, and again, Đurđa Knežević also critiqued me for Croatia. But then she admitted, you know, Danijela, this is somebody's PhD. We don't have these data. We don't have access to the data. For example, she referred to the Bled conference, you know, with where Tito sent his emissaries, and you know, it was like one of the first conferences in the early 70s, long before Drugca žena. You know, how transcripts from that conference, you know, if we had access to those, we would certainly have, you know, we would have known more about what was going on and what feminism, what kind of shape feminism was taking in the early 70s Yugoslavia. So we are facing this, you know, historians and cultural studies researchers, we have this chronic problem, acute problem of not having not having any data. You know, maybe it's us doing bad research, but it's really inaccessibility. And then, you know, you try to make something with what you have, and I think you will talk about this more in terms of your research of BG. You know, the question is, if you have what you have, you know, and you don't have a lot, you know. But then again, why are we doing historical research to begin with? Why are we researching memory politics? Why are we interested in knowing what it meant to be a woman in the 60s or in the 70s, or to be any other gender minority? Well, we want to do it so we have a reflection for it today. You know, we want to do it because we want to imagine otherwise. We want to imagine in a way that's not, you know, post-war national, ethno-nationalist, neoliberal, or whatever. You know, we want to have our imaginaries open, and I think this conference in Belgrade is about that. I kind of look at it as a pedagogic emancipatory practice, because we do want to imagine differently, and we want to have the right to know some things, you know. Well, that's the thing, you know, we think we do, but then you come under attack for being a revisionist. For doing what? And I don't understand. I think you two can, I mean, I was really, you know, uncomfortable reading that paper, because it was like, okay, so are you saying we're doing bad research, or are you prescribing what a feminist is, or what feminist policies are? So this is what I had a huge problem with. So yeah, so I'd like to end here and give the floor to Chiara.
Thank you. Chiara, I suggest that you just give 3 brief sentences about the paper.
Right.
Because we will, yeah.
I'm going to talk about it anyway.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
good.
So, yeah, basically Danijela already introduced this issue, which is quite controversial and contested in this last few years. And we can see that really this study of women's history in the 20th century is still very much conditioned by Cold War and post-Cold War narratives, right? These narratives tend to portray Marxist and state socialist women's organization as instruments of propaganda or chains of transmission only of communist parties and the state. So on the one hand, there is this sort of attempt to rediscover state socialist women's organization and Cold War women's activism, because we have been neglecting this for so long. But on the other hand, there is also this very contested, say, historical canon or feminist canon, which says that so-called any association with communism or the left, when we look at feminism and gender history, is somehow suspicious, right? We cannot trust the fact that these women were doing something because of autonomous thinking. They were just doing something for the party, for the state, and so on. And this is very much reproducing the idea that feminism could only exist in liberal democracies or capitalism, and is somehow drawing off Cold War mental mappings once again. And this paper by Nanette Funk is certainly a case in point, since she defines the new scholarship on state socialist women's organization as follows. I'm quoting her definition. A handful of feminist researchers, using strikingly similar language, have made strong claims for a more positive interpretation not only of state socialism accomplishment for women, but also of official state socialist women's organization in the region. So this is how she defined this revisionist group. I'm part of it, I'm proud of it, Kristen as well. And she's arguing for a let's say, more nuanced approach to the theme, but actually what she's doing is what Danijela said. She's sort of policing how we should think about this organization in advance without going into research about it, which is very problematic because precisely this is where the research came from. This is why we started to have empirical exploration of AFG or other state socialist organizations to really understand how women lived at the time and how they were trying to engage with politics. And Funk is stating that, for instance, that promoting women's employment, if done only because of party directives, makes one an instrument and not an agent or feminist. So she's somehow creating this binary distinction between women's interest and women's will to act and state policies, right? If you do something within the state and the state is not liberal, then you're by definition somehow an instrument or a puppet of the state. And so she states that meaningful women's agency is not possible under communism. And this idea, I would say, is not only limited to the West, because there was recently this article by Slavenka Drakulić in Juraj, which was also quite problematic. She somehow was reinstating this assumption of women's political passivity in post-socialist Europe, and she made a lot of good points in this article, but she also made some kind of sweeping generalization about the fact that women were disempowered by socialism, and so they could not fight against capitalism. And then you're kind of like, okay, but what is really leading to this disempowerment? Is it the fact that they were not active enough during socialism, or is it the fact that capitalism is destroying possibility to act, basically? And as Kristen has argued in her response to Nanette Funk, in fact, we should look at these things differently and think that women exercise agency within communist parties and state socialist women's organizations, and they were somehow striving to achieve something through the state and through this structure, and these were the ideas they believed in. I'm not saying they were not reproducing a certain degree of ideology, or they were not, complicit with some sort of repression, but on the other hand, they were also trying to use this institution to do something good for women, to create this possibility for emancipation. And one example of this is Vida Tomšić, who's a prominent politician who designed most gender and welfare politics in socialist Yugoslavia. And when we look at her stance, it's clear that she combines some sort of Marxist approach with what could be defined today as gender mainstreaming, right? So she believed that women's life condition could improve only through greater social and economic development, and she was also trying to strive for this women's participation to policy making. And it was also, of course, emancipation from above, but it was tied to the idea that women's emancipation went along with improvement in, development, and she was striving against class and geopolitical inequalities, as she made clear in the speech she gave to the UN Social Commission in 1963. So, in a way, she was opposed to feminism, which she considered as a bourgeois phenomenon, but on the other hand, she was defending women's right to contraception, abortion. She was one of those who contributed to put the right to Planned Parenthood in the 1974 Yugoslav constitution. So she really had an impact on the thinking at that time. And so we cannot just understand her life through this narrow label of communism or socialist or Yugoslav, because she was embedded in this global net web of anti-fascist, anti-colonial, and internationalist post-war networks. And she also established a lot of contacts with women's organizations in non-aligned countries, for instance. And she became really this gender and development expert. So her expertise was very much praised in places like India, for instance, because she, on the basis of her, experience in building institutions in post-war Yugoslavia, when Yugoslavia was completely destroyed, she could then go to Africa and to all these newly independent countries and somehow advise people how to build institutions, how to create a new administration, for instance, in the post-colonial countries and so on. Instead, in Nanette Funk's article, her figure is approached to the totalitarian paradigm, and somehow this is erasing women's agency under socialism. In the last part of her article, Funk explains, for instance, that the resurgence of interest in figures like Vida Tomšić is a reaction formation, as you call, towards neoliberalism, which would push scholars like us towards a desire to find what was good in state socialism. So it's some kind of form of, like this false consciousness, so to say. So it cannot be explained that there is a genuine interest for state socialist women's organization other than as a reaction against neoliberalism, right? So this is very problematic. And she's even warning that this academic trend towards this rediscovery might tarnish the reputation of women's and gender studies in the region, which I find extremely problematic. This is really like, okay, so what should we write to tell us more? And also the fact that the women in the region will misunderstand their own histories, which is also a kind of false consciousness definition. So in my view, and as Danijela has already said, this narrative is somehow reinforcing Western cultural hegemony and also post-Cold War hierarchies in knowledge production, and is also silencing this relevant genealogy of feminism and women's history in the region. And throughout the article, Yugoslavia is treated as any other country from the socialist bloc. It's treated as totalitarian, and this is somehow obscuring this local tradition of Marxist critical theory, but also Marxist feminist ideas, which were created within, but also in opposition to state institution, because there was some space to discuss. And if you read about these 1970s feminists, they started to develop their own critique of the state within the institution of the state. They published first in the Žena official magazine, and then they would go to create this Drugarica Žena conference at the end of it. So it was really a very specific context, and we cannot just equate state socialism, Marxist critique, feminist critique. It has to be somehow articulated differently. And I believe that instead of applying this totalitarian paradigm, we should rediscover figures such as Vida Tomšić as the expression of, in a way, let's say, have a less biased approach towards the history of socialism, trying to understand the multiple identities and orientations that went under the name of communism or Marxism in 20th century Europe, in East, West, and Southeast. So you cannot just say, okay, communism was the same everywhere. You have to understand what it meant at that time, and also state socialist women's organizations, they have to be placed in a complex web of geopolitical and historical relations, and I believe really that as historians or as gender scholars, we should look at how women defined agency in their own terms at that time, in that context, without trying, to define in advance what we're looking for, what type of agency we're trying to look for, what type of activism, what type of words, and so on. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Hard to follow all of these wonderful comments. So rather than talking extemporaneously, I think I'm going to give you a sample of some feminist revisionist scholarship of my own. Because I'm not a historian, I'm an ethnographer, I like to think about history as something that is produced by people, real people, having real debates. And so I'm going to read you a little reflection on a seminar that I attended in Sofia in 2012. In March of 2012, I attended a planning seminar hosted by a local women's non-governmental organization in Sofia, Bulgaria. This organization had recently learned about the possibility of EU-level funding available for the study of women's lives under communism. The NGO convened a group of leading scholars in the disciplines of history, anthropology, and sociology, most of whom were Bulgarian women in their 50s and 60s, to discuss the possibility of working on the communist era. They assembled to grapple with the question of whether they would be able to write an objective account of the period between 1944 and 1990, given that they had lived most of their lives during that time. The women gathered were deeply concerned about how their personal memories of the era might affect their scholarship. While they recognized the diversity of their individual experiences, the one thing they all agreed on was that communism was not as bad as most people wanted to believe that it was. Another thing that the women all agreed on was that younger scholars, who had not lived during the era, should not write the history of women under communism. They were also wary of West European scholars, whose writings might perpetuate Cold War stereotypes. One woman passionately recalled reading something written by a British scholar about how gray life had been behind the Iron Curtain. She disagreed with this British account, saying,
My life was full of color. I don't know what she was talking about. Another woman explained that I was young and I went to university and had my children during that time. How could I not look back on those years and feel happy? And so the debate continued about who could best achieve objectivity. One professor of history stated that there was no such thing as objectivity in history. And she said, quote, "Historians have come to accept the subjective nature of most historical accounts." Another historian disagreed, saying, "There is historical truth. Events happen or they didn't happen. There are ways of finding the truth if you look in the right places." A sociologist complained that the Bulgarian communist government had manipulated all of the statistics about women's empowerment. The leader of the seminar replied that statistics produced in the democratic era are still being manipulated, asserting that statistics are just as subjective as historiography, because subjective positions inform the questions that we ask. Every woman in the room agreed with her, but the question of how to study their past remained. An older woman asked, "How can we study something that we lived?" The seminar leader said, "I can't believe that something I lived is now considered history. It makes me feel so old." One of the younger Bulgarian women in the room said, "I was only a child when communism ended, but I have wonderful memories of that time." I knew from a different conversation with this young woman that she was deeply nostalgic for the Bulgaria of the communist era, despite having only lived in it as a small girl. She told me that everyone was happier then, that they, quote, had a purpose, unquote. She had been in 8th grade when the regime change took place. She told the group, "I had no one who could advise me on how to live in a market economy. Things were so much simpler before. I wish I had grown up before the changes." I was the only non-Bulgarian in the room, and there was never a moment when I could put my pen down. After the first hour, my wrist was throbbing. The assembled women told great stories. The oldest woman in the room told about having worked as an English language interpreter. She remembered being sent to the airport to meet a visiting female dignitary from Ethiopia in the mid-1980s. In the car to the hotel, the Ethiopian woman had asked if they could stop at a pharmacy to buy some tampons. The Bulgarian interpreter had heard of these and knew where they were, but they did not exist in Bulgaria in the 1980s. Rather than explain this, the interpreter stopped at a pharmacy and purchased the product that Bulgarian women used instead. The Ethiopian woman was horrified when she was presented with a massive roll of unrefined cotton in a plastic bag. Another woman shared what it was like to be a divorced mother of 2 children before 1989, acknowledging that the communist state had done a lot to support single mothers. One woman spoke about the state support that she, the first person in her family to earn a university degree, had received. Another woman in the room admitted to the group that she had been passionately anti-communist for most of the 1990s and 2000s. It was only now that she was beginning to see what communism had done for women and for ordinary Bulgarians. She said, "I guess it was a good system for a lot of people," signaling to the assembled group that she was willing to participate in any grant proposal that emerged from the seminar. I caught the eye of a senior Bulgarian historian in the room. I knew that she had always been more favorably disposed to what the communists had been able to do for women. From her expression, I could guess that she was silently seething at what she perceived to be the sheer opportunism of some of the other historians in the room. Now that there might be EU money available to support scholarship on the era, they had suddenly reformed their once stridently anti-communist opinions. I knew she disapproved of what she called the marketization of historical scholarship, wherein underpaid Bulgarian historians had little choice but to sell their skills to the highest foreign bidder in order to make a living. She felt that they had become mercenary historians, dispatched into the archives to find evidence for whatever thesis Western donors wanted proved. And then there was me, the American ethnographer doing research for my 5th book on post-socialist Bulgaria. The organizer of the seminar had invited me to attend because she knew that I was interested in the socialist feminism and the communist-era women's committee, the Committee of the Bulgarian Women's Movement, particularly their work among progressive women in Africa. My research on the communist women's movement in Bulgaria challenged many deeply held stereotypes about mass women's organizations in social societies and lent legitimacy to the idea that communist regimes had done some good things for women as women. This is the revisionist part of my research. The women in that seminar in March of 2012 clearly believed that there were good things about the system, but they were frustrated by the historiography of the last 22 years, which had ejected every bit of the baby, in this case support for women, along with the proverbial bathwater of communism. They believed that the whole erasure of the communist record of support of women was the result of the ongoing influence of Cold War politics. The women in the seminar wanted to correct this undifferentiated stereotype of the gray life in Eastern Europe. But was it possible? In a supposedly democratic era that celebrates political rights and the freedom of speech, could any one of them produce a more nuanced historical account of the communist era as a Bulgarian? Was there really intellectual or ideological pluralism when it came to the historiography of the recent past in Eastern Europe? Or are the Cold War rhetoric stronger today than ever before? Is there de facto censorship when it means saying anything nice about the communist era? One had to wonder whether the EU money available to study women's lives under communism was specifically earmarked for studies that will show how bad these lives were. It is interesting that the possibility of this funding came in the wake of the 2009 establishment of the European Day of Remembrance for the Victims of Stalinism and Nazism, also known as International Black Ribbon Day. This Day of Remembrance is observed annually on August 23rd, the date of the 1939 signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the non-aggression pact between Stalin and Hitler. Václav Havel and other human rights activists first proposed the idea for International Black Ribbon Day in 2008 in the Prague Declaration of European Conscience and Communism. This was a declaration that openly equated communism and Nazism and condemned communist ideology as responsible for crimes against humanity. The Prague Declaration called for an overhaul of European history textbooks and the creation of institutes of European memory and conscience at the EU level, which would provide a supranational framework for the equal condemnation of communism and Nazism. Institutes such as these have proliferated throughout Eastern Europe, as I discussed earlier today. EU-level policies, like the instituting of new commemoration of the past, can have strong silencing effects on scholars in Eastern Europe. I have become very aware of the political implications of my own research. Since 2010, I've been doing research for this book that explores the international and domestic activism of the Bulgarian Women's Committee. Although I'm not a historian by training, I've been working in the archives and doing extensive interviews with women, not only in Bulgaria, but also in the socialist allied country of Zambia, as well as working in the Zambian archives. Although my project is still ongoing, the last several years have convinced me that the leaders of the Bulgarian Women's Committee sincerely believe that the socialist path to development was better for the world's women. They were encouraged in these beliefs by comparing their own domestic privileges and entitlements to those women in the capitalist countries. For example, one older woman told me that she heard that women were not allowed to study as undergraduates at Harvard in 1970, but she thought that this was communist propaganda. It was only after the First World Conference on Women in Mexico City in 1975 that she learned that coeducation was only recently accomplished in the United States. Of course, the Bulgarian women were aware that their system had many flaws and that communist regimes had not solved all of women's problems. But even as they actively lobbied the Bulgarian Politburo to protect and support working women at home, they also reached out internationally to nurture progressive women's movements across the developing world, including in Zambia, where I've done research. While they were always limited by the geopolitics of the Cold War, communist women's organizations helped build an important international network of women whose activism still has positive legacies today. I was in Zambia in January 2013, and I can attest to this. But because I am trying to capture these nuances of women's activism under communism, I often elicit strong reactions when I give public lectures. At a talk I gave in Washington, D.C. in 2011, I discussed some recent survey data that found an increasing preference for the stability and security of the communist era among citizens in several Eastern European countries as a response to the global economic recession and the Eurozone crisis. A German woman in the audience raised her hand and told me that the opinions of these citizens should not be considered because they had suffered irreparable psychological damage by virtue of having lived under communism. Rather than engaging with a renewed critique of capitalism from the East, this woman preferred to see those with political beliefs different from hers as permanently mentally disabled. After another talk that I gave in Vienna at the end of September 2011, a young Bulgarian woman in the audience sent me an email thanking me for my lecture and my courage in discussing some of the positive legacies of Todor Živkov, Bulgaria's communist leader between 54 and 89. She wrote, and I quote, "No one in Bulgaria can talk about the nostalgia and the pains of transition without being framed as a communist and as someone who denies the crimes of the Živkov regime. So the important issues you deal with are not present in the discourse or media," unquote. I emailed her back and asked why she felt that there was such a silence around these issues. She told me that doctoral students were afraid to study these issues because they feared they would not be granted their degrees or be able to find jobs. Finally, I gave a talk on the global influences of the Bulgarian Women's Committee at Sofia University in March of 2012, just days before the NGO seminar that I attended. At the end of the talk, one of the professors in the audience raised her hand and said, and I quote, "I enjoyed your talk, and I agreed with everything you said, but we, Bulgarians, would never be allowed to say this." Since then, I've been wondering what it means to be allowed to speak about 20th century communism. In an era when many historians are still focused on excavating communist crimes from secret police files, of which there are many, and right-wing governments in Eastern Europe continue their lustration of communist collaborators, is it possible to challenge the intellectual status quo? And shouldn't challenging the intellectual status quo be the work of feminist scholars? As I said, in 2013, I had the opportunity to interview women in Zambia who worked together with the communist women's movement in Bulgaria. I've conducted extensive interviews, but I fear that the critical scholarly community will not respect the thoughts and opinions of Zambian septuagenarians and Bulgarian octogenarians. There are still those out there who think them psychologically damaged by communism. Perhaps by combining both the Bulgarian and Zambian points of view, as well as the archival research that I'm doing, I can begin to recover some of the now almost entirely forgotten Second World, Third World feminist cooperation. I really hope that the work that I do and some of the others here on this panel can shed light on the now forgotten part of women's international organizing in the 20th century. And perhaps because I'm an American and not a European, and because I'm an ethnographer and not a historian, I will be allowed to complicate the overly simplistic Cold War narratives of women's organizing that continues to paralyze scholarship on Eastern Europe and limit our contemporary political imagination. Thank
you. Short notice in Serbian. Ukoliko bude nekoga ko želi da postavi pitanje na ovom jeziku, koji većina nas za ovim stolom razume, čak i Kristen govori bugarski, tako da razume srpski, ali može se prevesti, molim vas da slobodno postavite pitanje na kom god jeziku budete želeli i osjećali se prijatno da to učinite. Is there anyone now ready to raise his or her hand? Okay, if not, then I will just sum up very briefly some major points, I would say, that we heard here today. So we have erasure or falsification of facts. We have reduction of our own experiences, or Yugoslav, but not only Yugoslav experiences. We have failure to reflect on our own experiences, of this epistemological aspect which was popping up all along. Then we have policing on notions on how we think and how we form our epistemes. Then we also have this question which Kristen posed, but I think it was present all along. Who is allowed to speak, and when, and how? And then connected to this, what is a revision, and who gives the decision about what is a revision? I think it's interesting how revisionism is differently interpreted here at this table today, but also at the lecture. And then, in the end, those issues on objectivity, which are disciplinary in a way, between history and ethnography, memory studies, but not only in disciplinary vein, but also in other veins. I want to state two sentences which I found very striking, and I would like us to discuss them, but also with the audience. The idea that we're here because we're wanting to imagine otherwise, so the different imagination, different knowledge, and also wanting to have a purpose, something which was taken away from the people who are dead. And I'm again referring to the art exhibition in order to put her back in our discussion. If there's still no raised hands, there is one. Okay.
Just would like to, first of all, thank you all once again for the great work I think you do. And I think it's not the only field where we suffer in this sort of denying the truth or revisionism that way. First of all, I think revisionism is like the other things. It can be for good and for bad. So if you're defending the truth, it should be called with its name. So you stand them to defend like something that happened and was called other names. And what usually goes on, like me, is more work we call revisionism in the bad way. And I think it's very much more related with money than it is with ideologies. And I think it's going on like all over. And I think it's done by, I don't know, directors such as Martin Scorsese, which has done such a great job with reviewing what Wall Street culture is, and taking all of the pain out of the picture, kind of like making it also almost like a Tarantino movie in his last Wolf of Wall Street, whereas something much better had been done in the past, for instance, but apparently it was not what image they wanted to live, or it's been done with movies such as Pearl Harbor, or there is a huge field that I think we should all explore and fight that revisionism with revisionism.
I just wanted to ask, or maybe, because there is, at one point in the text, Nanette says that she used to belong to Marxist feminist groups in the US, and I'm aware of the current, my generation Marxist feminist groups in the US. Maybe you've heard of Endnotes and Lies. Those are the journals that circulate. Maya Gonzalez, there's a couple of people, mostly philosophers, but not always, so who are Marxist feminists, and Marxist feminism in Zagreb is pretty big. And, you know, I just don't know how she positions herself as a Marxist feminist and then does such damage, because, you know, the damage is not just in calling you revisionist and objecting in the way that she does, but she's totally oblivious of the current regime's patriarchal ethno-nationalists prevailing in, for example, I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think that our current intellectual elites would, you know, be sort of on the same side with her, because they don't see this, that any feminist knowledge is desirable at all to be in the academia. So there's like 2 people teaching feminist theory at my university, like 1.5 maybe. So, you know, so it's like, why do you do that? Just to prove your point that you were doing that because I kind of find in her objection, I find, maybe I'm just reading between the lines, or maybe I'm wrong here, that she objects the way that research is done there, that it should not be done that way, that, I don't know, I somehow have the problem with not just her Cold War stand, but with like her preaching how research is done by you guys.
I just want to say something. I think it's not just the issue of anti-communism, it's also the issue of second-wave feminism that I think is very important here, because second-wave feminism really had this idea of autonomy from the state, from political parties, from structure, so it's pretty much this vision that was radical at the time, but now if it's transposed to the now and to look at this period, it becomes sort of so to say, restraining or something. So I don't think it's only wanting to reproduce really this anti-capitalist discourse, it's also this unwillingness to question this paradigm that feminism, it can only be autonomous from the state or it cannot be. All right? So I don't know if Kristen wants to say.
I'm happy to talk with you.
I'm not going to play the devil's advocate. Last year in Brunswick, I spoke with Annette, and she said, well, this praxis, I went to Korčula, I was there, I was talking to Vranitsky, yes, she was talking to Vranitsky, but not to Vida Tomšić.
Yeah.
So that may, I'm saying I'm not her advocate, but maybe that explains her somehow perception of things, because she was very welcome with Kangarga, with others, you see, and those other guys, Vida Tomšić, going to India, Sri Lanka, she was not present.
Right.
You see, so it, some kind of an anachronism already there happening. So that was it. Thank you.
I feel the need to maybe inform the audience if there are people who do not know about this Nanette Funk's article. Because obviously we do not deal only with Nanette Funk's article here, but it's very prominent in our discussion. So in any case, Nanette Funk was one of the two editors of the book which came out in 1993 and was very important edited volume on the lives of women in post-socialist countries. The contributors to that book were very diverse in their views, but that was basically the only book for a long period of time which offered any reflection on how it was to live in Hungary, in Poland, in Yugoslavia, and different countries of Eastern Europe. And then different kind of research, a revisionist kind of research came into vogue in the last couple of years, and Nanette Funk decides to write a paper which is a sort of condemnation of this new politics of research, new politics of understanding of exactly what Danijela and Chiara and Kristen also talked about. So it's interesting to see how this revision of revision is now being revised.
But I just wanted to say that one of the things that I think is really important is the concept of agency from an epistemological point of view, because this question of whether or not agency requires independence from the state. And in most transitional economies and countries in Eastern Europe, the creation of civil society with Western money was about creating non-governmental organizations to oppose the state. And so we have this idea that in order to have true agency, one must be independent of the state, which creates a really interesting problem for socialists and communists. Because if the goal of social organization is to capture the state and make the state truly democratically responsive to the people, then the minute one becomes a part of the state, you no longer have agency, using Nanette Funk's definition. And it's not only her definition, it's a definition that's widespread within political science. So the question is, agency, I believe, is a Cold War concept. In the same way that we have to discuss terminology about what is a feminist, who's policing our use of the word feminist, we also have to be really careful about the word agency. Because if by agency we mean people outside of the state, that means anyone who is in a state has no agency. That means Tsipras in Greece right now has no agency, which is absurd to say that he has no agency. He may not have any agency in face of the Troika, but nevertheless, the idea that social organizing the goal of social organizing can be the capture of the state, if that is the type of politics you practice, and then the state becomes the tool of the people, then if the minute you capture the state and use the state for the purposes of social engagement, you no longer have agency. It's a tautology that you cannot get out of. You are doomed never to have agency. Yeah.
yeah, just to continue with this agency debate, if we on the other hand try to understand agency of capability of citizens to transform their visions, desires into action, into something which has to deal with the real life, then ethnographic work in post-socialist countries clearly and everywhere more or less show that people perceive themselves much more agents of their social lives in socialism than today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I agree. If I may just add to that, we just 2 days ago we had Steph Jensen, who's an anthropologist, who's done extensive work on Bosnia. His book Yearnings in the meantime just came out, and he basically concluded by saying, you know, people did have, again, referring to this tautology, how, you know, state being entrepreneurial and wanting citizens to be responsible for themselves is this sort of the neoliberal moment. You know, you want state to take care of you. So, just you know, just to add to what has been said before. So, do we want state? Is our agency only possible if we act against the state or counter to the state, or do we want? You know, and state, I don't mean Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't mean Serbia. I mean, you know, state as like a function. You know, as a functional term. You know, how do you reconcile that? So, you know, I agree with this big Cold War rhetoric in a way. You know, so.
Reflect on another notion which is really exploited and actually taken for granted in scholarship on Yugoslavia. It's also the notion, beside agency, also the notion of legitimacy. So it's taken for granted that social system, etc., was not legitimate, non-legitimate, and thus non-democratic. So no one is willing to deconstruct actually how Yugoslav theoreticians or politicians understood democracy, and actually in all the archival works and constitution, etc., what is referred to as the notion of socialist democracy, our self-managing socialist democracy. So we are not reflecting on the fact that there was a particular understanding of what democracy is, but we are just departing from this received truth that it was a non-democratic and thus illegitimate system. So just deconstructing the notion of legitimacy. So what does it mean, legitimacy, even in today's terms, when electoral turnout is so low in these countries, when, you know, parties are elected with 30% of votes, etc. What is legitimacy?
And what consequences it has for feminism? I'd like to kind of bring the discussion back to feminism. Why do we as feminists need, you know, studies on APG? And we do need it. And how do we approach that? So there are some questions, Adriana.
Thank you very much for the contribution.
Is it on?
It's not on.
It's not on.
I don't think so.
Well, thank you very much for your presentations. I enjoyed very much. I thought it's a very serious thinking behind your statements. My question is, I would love to hear from each of you, how do you think it's possible to make it widely known, your scholarship, your results of your research? Because I do believe that it is something that many are hungry for, and they do not have access as we do have tonight. So thank you very much again.
Weeks ago in Ljubljana we had a presentation of a book of my colleague about new tradition or rediscovering tradition of singing partisan songs in Slovenia. And there were a couple of people in the audience who were real partisans, like 90-year-old people. And we discussed a lot. It was similar like here, very critical and basically nice. When we finished, one of these old men came to me and said, okay, but how can we bring this to the surface? And I don't have an answer for that, of course. I mean, it's a complex question and it's a kind of anxiety we all share. I was telling that to people today. You were now referring to that. Who is allowed to speak about that? After a lecture, I said, I enjoyed it so much, but I feel frustrated in a way because I feel it's much easier for you to talk about this than to us. Because here you are inevitably involved even before you open your mouth to all the debates and self-censorship, you can't escape anyway. So it opens essential questions about the role of public intellectuals and blurring the position between activists and scholars. And I think we all do that to a certain extent, depending on where we are. But, you know, my Serbian editor would say, no one reads books anyway, so.
Yeah, let's take some more questions. Yes, before we talk, let's have some more questions.
Yeah. Good.
Maybe collect some.
Yeah. So we have them.
As a member of the minority here who actually lived and did research in the former Yugoslavia, on the former Yugoslavia, I'm kind of carried back to some of the types of seminars I would get in the 1980s, and people would be discussing pretty much the same questions, right? We're not permitted to say this. We're permitted to say this. How do we get a voice? And of course, one of the answers was through trying to mobilize international NGOs and all, which was reasonably successful. But this actually gets to the question. When we look at the demands for unifying curricula, they're not all driven by the left, particularly in this part of the world, or rather by the right, and particularly in this part of the world. A lot of the demands for mandating history have come from the NGO sector. And of course, they've had to do with the legacies of the wars and the like. But they've gone so far as at one stage, Sonia Serko dusted off the Verbalni Dei sections of the old criminal law of Yugoslavia and wanted to criminalize genocide, which is really quite fascinating. Do you folks see any role for international NGOs in trying to get the word out the way it used to be when I was young? Or do you see resistance from it?
Shall we collect? I think we should collect some
more if there are questions.
Yeah. There's one here.
There's one here.
Just a short one. The equation individual, state, and in between institutions. Yeah. How are we going to do? How we are going to follow institutions?
Maybe we should answer the questions and then proceed.
Yeah, I'll start real quickly. Just two really good questions there. I mean, how do scholars make their voices heard, especially in a world that is full of noise? Much noisier than it was 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, right? You could have maybe the biggest NGO behind you, Amnesty International or whatever, and if they don't make enough noise, they're still not going to be heard, right? It's a question of how do you get the public attention. And I think that and this is my opinion, so please take it as my opinion, but I think that the traditional routes that we have available to us, journal articles, scholarly books, are just not working in the same way. We have to be much more creative with YouTube clips or documentary films, podcasts, social media. I think there is a way in which you can get a message out there, and there are some wonderful websites that have popped up in Eastern Europe, like Left East, and variety of places that are really trying to get a counter discourse out into the public space. That being said, I do still think there is a role for these big non-governmental organizations. I was in Bucharest 3 weeks ago at a conference that was sponsored by the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum. And what was fascinating to me were the number of Romanians who stood up and asked the Holocaust Museum director to make a statement against the Prague Declaration. And this poor guy was put on the spot, right? Like, why is this my responsibility? But it comes back to this question of who has the power and the authority. If the U.S. Holocaust Museum makes a statement, it's much more powerful than a local NGO in Romania.
Did he do it?
He did in the conference. He did not. He was very clear that they made it known to the powers in Washington that they were opposed, but they did not release a press statement because the American government was in favor of supporting the Prague Declaration. Therefore, again, right? It's very difficult. But I do think, to come back to this first question here, it's a really important, really very important issue. And some of us, scholars, aren't very media savvy. We don't necessarily like to talk to journalists and newspapers for a variety of possibly good reasons. But I do think it's important for us to engage more publicly. And it's difficult to do that because sometimes the public just doesn't care. But to the extent that we can start to get people aware that this scholarship is being done. I mean, look, when I saw this article by Nanette Funk, my first reaction was outrage because I was angry, but my second reaction was gratitude because she did us a huge favor. She published this in the European Journal of Women's Studies. So everybody knows. She named 9 of us, including Chiara and I, by name, and said we were all East European scholars, which was kind of problematic, but and affiliated with CEU as well in some way. But it was a favor because by attacking us, she named us, and she basically pointed the direction to people who wanted to find our scholarship. And in some ways, that's what academic scholarship should be about healthy debate. We shouldn't be just having one side of the story. And so in some ways, I think this is a good thing. I just really do wish, I mean, personally, for me, it's about writing books. I try to get it out there, and it's about teaching. When I teach, I also feel like my classes, my curricula are absolutely steeped in these questions. And that's how I try to do it, my little tiny piece. I can't, take over the world, but I'm trying. No? Okay.
No? Okay. What about the institution, individual, and the state, and building of administration? I mean, I find this question very interesting because we are now in a very gender, but not only gender, but very mainstreaming policy-oriented era, last 15 years or so. And we also have this building of institutions and this aim of I don't know, organizing the state, but it is not the same. So what can you say about, I mean, there's differences, and I would go back to Sanya's question, which I think is important.
Let me just add, I'm currently researching several things in Bosnia and Herzegovina, most notably the protests, the plenums, and the floods. Protesti, poplave, protesti, plenumi, poplave. 3 Ps, exactly. And I'm trying to connect the 3, and there are 2 connections when researching from whatever point of view you'd like. One is the weak state, weak institutions, state not doing what they're supposed to do completely. I mean, just letting NGO, civil sector, which then I always say, like poštena inteligencija, there's honest NGO and dishonest NGO. So there is that. Okay, and then people organizing themselves. So samoorganizovanje is another keyword, weak state and self-organizing, and people realizing for the first time after 20 years of Dayton, because this is the 20th anniversary of peace for us, that the state is not going to take care of you, and in fact it's promoting this logic that we should all be responsible for ourselves, like I just previously stated. And people realizing that, for example, the cemented, institutionalized ethno-nationalist logic that really fell apart during the floods because you cannot control the river. The river has its sort of flow, and when there's a flood and it's disconnected, you just realize how detrimental for people's lives that is, how 2 entities didn't communicate in time, and then who receives aids from whom. So there was a severe disruption. For example, protests and plenums didn't happen in Republika Srpska, and they only happened in the Federation, but when floods happened, it affected the entire area, and floods, in fact, brought and were an end to the plenums, unfortunately, which started in February. Just to give you a short genealogy, so it was February 2014 when the protest started in Tuzla, and then we had floods in mid, like you guys here, you had Obrenovac. So I don't know like what the situation here was at the time, but in Bosnia for sure, you know, weak state, and people finally, they just realized the state was going to buy, they got, families got 5,000 marks. Which was nothing. In fact, it wasn't in cash. It was to buy, to purchase things like tiles and you know, different sorts of you know, shovels and whatnot that were, you know, the prices were like so increased for that. Like it wasn't really the market prices that they were getting. So they got that. It was like a buyout. The state just said, oh, here are these little coupons. You can buy things like for twice as much. And then people as neighbors starting like these new solidarities that have emerged after the protest plenums and floods. So I don't know if that answers your question, but this is what I find on the ground. This is what I find when talking to people who got affected, some of which are my students, people in society. I haven't talked to the state yet, but yeah, so that's it.
Okay, I will have one final question for all five of you. The way that these issues that we talked about today came to us was through nostalgia. Would you agree with me when we talk about memory and memory issues, memory studies? I think that socialism was back 5 or 6 or 7 years ago through Yugo nostalgia and different types of nostalgia. So I would like to ask all of you, how would you combine this idea of epistemology, of knowledge on the one hand, and nostalgia on the other, and with the idea that we're really having the issues of generations, different generations who have different experiences, knowledges, lifestyles as well, and also different gadgets to transmit those lifestyles around. Who wants to start?
That's a big one.
Chiara, no.
Right. There is this very beautiful quote by Ljubica that I cannot recall by heart, but basically she's quoting Benjamin's thesis on history, and she's saying that listening today to the voices of the women in the past, one can look both at the mistakes that should not be repeated, but also these reserves of utopian energy that are still there and unexploited. So for me this was very inspiring talk, because I really feel this, I don't know, sort of responsibility to be faithful to the previous generation, to sort of recall these voices from the past, also coming from a region which had a quite important anti-fascist tradition, which is the region of Bologna. So, and hearing as a kid stories about the partisans through my granny, so it's really something, it's definitely about nostalgia, but it's also something very, related to your biography, right? It's how you get to that type of research. It's never a chance to sort of get there through. Well, Rosie Taradotti famously says, you're not choosing your research, the research chooses you.
Yeah.
Yes, well, for me, I think the biggest challenge was to deconstruct, as I said, this hegemonic memory regime, which has hardened through the years. And really, when you see that one dogma is being formed, you start to question that something is wrong with this interpretation of things. So we had these notions imposed, as you said, legitimacy, it was a non-democratic regime, black and white vision. So I think for me the biggest challenge is really to offer a nuanced perspective, although with the risk of always being labeled in the region as either a red historian or nostalgic, as you said. And I think here comes my skepticism on the question of what we can do, because whenever we engage as public historians or public intellectuals, we always risk being attacked ad hominem or labeled, as I said, as in Slovenia, what is the label?
Feminine.
Yeah, sorry. So in Slovenia, this famous label of left fascism, etc. So I think it's really, it's a very tough struggle, but more determined to persist.
And if I may just add,
there's another one.
You can take it for later.
Okay,
I don't know. I really think that living where we do is a great vantage point for imagining otherwise, because, you know, for me, it's not about nostalgia. It's not even how we remember. It's like what we do with it. In the same way as post-socialism, for example, or post-communism, is problematic, and Boris Buden does a great job of describing and talking about post-communism in Zona Prelaska, his 2011 book, I think, 2011. In the sense that it's done away with socialism as a plausible way of thinking and doing politics after 1989, you know, with, like, you know, sort of a termination with a certain, well, you know, Weltanschauung, you know, a certain view of the world, how the world should look like, how we should be, you know. Post-feminism does the same sort of damage, and sort of not accounting for multiple feminisms, like Kristen is saying, does a similar damage. I don't think that we need feminist police for telling us who is feminist and who's not. I think that we need more feminism, we need more solidarity across the world, we need to learn from each other, and there's so many things to learn about. I mean, we were all, as young scholars, you know, influenced by, you know, Rosie and Judith and, you know, all those household names now. But I think, you know, Western scholarships has a lot to learn from us, especially in the world that's like falling apart, you know, with like such vehement criticism of neoliberalism. I think that, you know, Spain and Greece are offering us different horizons, you know, to think European Union, to think who gets to define Europe? You know, is Europe being defined in Brussels or in Athens or in Belgrade? You know, during this conference. You know, so this is what I think is crucial. I think these posts, we should just get rid of them, and I think we need more socialism and more feminism. And that's all.
I have to admit that most of what I'm doing is coming from my need to not only to understand, but also to give certain voice to a generation of my father. But in the course on my academic career, I also understood that it's basically also a need to explain certain things to my kids. And nostalgia is a catchy term here, and we all know all the debates going on around it, and how paralyzing debate can become the very moment you insert this word into it. But I would nevertheless insist on it. I think it's not the way to deal with all this self-censorship stuff around nostalgia and socialism and experience of socialism, is not to abandon that term or to reject it and speak on some objective, whatever, data, facts, but to try to decontaminate it. It's not only fancy elitist artists who can speak about Yugoslavian socialism. It should be also people who experienced it. Yeah. And yeah, because otherwise what we have is what Buden actually warns us. We have this anesthetic state in which people are just without feeling, without engagement, without right to engage emotionally with their own existence and their own experience. And that's a great ground to start with neoliberal experiments. And we all know that. Look at my hometown, Jagodina, with all this crazy... It's actually an imagination of modernity, what this guy is doing there with waterfalls and giraffes and whatever. And this modernity has nothing to do with experience, very modernist experience of most of citizens of that city. And that's why I think it's important to let these people to be also engaged, emotionally engaged about their own past.
I will just say that I have no parents or grandparents from anywhere in Eastern Europe. So
that's why it's easier for you.
Yeah, maybe that's why. And certainly nostalgia is an important political factor in Bulgaria, and it brought me to a certain set of intellectual questions. But I think what's more important for me as a scholar is the fact that when I'm in the classroom or when I'm reading contemporary scholarship, I feel like the field of political thinking has been foreclosed to us. That my imagination about what the world might look like in the future is incredibly narrow. And especially, I have a 13-year-old daughter and I have 18 to 22-year-old students. They have such a small imagination. And that is really sad to me. I think that something really deep has been lost in our collective culture, that our young people have so little faith in the future. And so for me, what's beautiful about rethinking some of these ideas, going back maybe to the source, is the ways in which they just broaden the imagination of what's possible. Even if it went wrong, it was still possible. It wasn't unthinkable. And if we want to change things, if we want to be progressive forces for good, we have to start imagining the world, not as it is, but as it could be, as it should be maybe, a different, better place. And I just don't feel like we live in a world where that seems very possible anymore. And that's sad to me. So that's where my nostalgia comes from. It's nostalgia for a greater imagination than we have today.
Maybe it was like that sometimes and we forgot about it thanks to some revisionism.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
I want to thank you all. This was really inspiring, and I think that my thoughts are shared by the audience. And I want to thank the audience for coming and to invite it to come to all other events.